Okay, well, hello, everybody, and thank you so much for being here for our third and final research report and release of the year. This is our 2022 National Prospective Student Survey. My name is Steve App. Thank you to everyone who's here to hear the insights from this latest report. We're so thankful that you've made time for us. My role today is pretty simple. I want to share a few housekeeping notes and get out of the way so the rest of our really talented team can present their findings to you today. So a couple things to share as we get started here today. Number one, yes, this webinar is being recorded. And yes, you will get a copy of that recording after we wrap up here today. As part of being here, you will also get a copy of the full report, of which we're going to show you some interesting insights from today. And that will be sent to you a little bit later on this afternoon. We do have the chat feature today. Feel free to use it. We have folks from SimpsonScarborough here who will be able to monitor that chat and engage with you throughout the entire discussion here today. We also have a Q&A feature. So if you have specific questions about aspects of what we're sharing today, and you want to drop those in the Q&A feature, we'll leave time at the end of this session to answer those questions live. A little bit about what we're going to talk about today in terms of the data that is informing the insights here. Earlier this year, we sent an online survey to a little over 1,600 high school senior and juniors via an online survey. And Emma, if you want to jump to the next slide so I can show them that data here. I'm really excited about the variety that we've covered within this sample size. We've surveyed individuals who have come from all across the United States, have a varied set of academic areas of interest, varying levels of exposure to the college-going process, and vary in their political leanings and political views as well. Joining me today to talk more about the insights of this report are Emma Miller, our Director of Insights, Kevin Tyler, our Director of Community Engagement, and Jason Simon, our CEO and partner. Also with us here today is Meredith Simpson, our partner and VP of Research and Analytics, who will be happy to answer any methodology questions or research questions that you might have about these findings. And at this point, speaking of panelists, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to my friend and colleague, Jason Simon, who's going to get us started here today. Jason.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Steve. We're really excited to welcome everyone to this webinar. I did want to take a moment and offer some thanks to our team of folks that have really worked so hard in bringing this report to you. A whole ton of effort and time spent in doing the analysis, the preparation, and the sharing of this data. So thank you all for the time and the attention. There obviously has been a ton of coverage, conversation, and research that has been done about trust and perceptions of higher education generally, as well as kind of cost and value issues. There also have been lots and lots of stories of student mental health, all of us, including students, feeling exhausted, and a whole lot of coverage around declines in enrollment and the challenges that many schools are facing in building traditional undergraduate enrollment. Not all of the things that we're going to share with you today are good news, but it's not all bad either. And more importantly, we hope that it will be directional for you in thinking about how you approach your marketing communications, enrollment, and importantly, your student success efforts. This report, as Steve mentioned, is a study of high school juniors and seniors. It's our 5th study of traditional undergraduates since March 2020 and the start of COVID. We did want to take a moment to acknowledge that we know that there are other audiences, adult learners, transfers, that make up a considerable percentage of the college-going population now. And we are intending to include them in our research work that we will be doing and in our plans for 2023. As we've broadened our work with clients over the last several years, we increasingly are talking and working through challenges around a disconnect between marketing and experience, and how marketing really needs to be truly reflective of the experience that students are having, whether that's trying to enroll, trying to get financial support, or it's once they become students. And quite simply, the very best schools are really living their brand promises. They're auditing how their community shapes their brand, what those conversations look like, and then they're delivering marketing experiences and tactics that represent that in authentic and inspiring ways, and meeting students in that moment. Our hope is that with this study and with some of this research, you are going to get some necessary information that helps you better manage your brand across the institution, and in particular helps fuel some conversations between marketing, enrollment, and student affairs, and that ultimately leads to greater outcomes, greater equity, and a greater experience for everyone, more effective marketing and institutional success. So with that bit of preamble, I'm going to pass it on to Emma to get us going.
Thanks, Jason. So as we were sifting through all of this data and we were trying to think of the story we wanted to tell and the points we wanted to make, I think one thing became clear as we were looking through it is that higher education in some aspects has neglected to become student-centered. And what we mean by that specifically is putting the needs and the wants of the students ahead of the institution as a whole. And in order for higher education to thrive, evolve, and innovate, which we acknowledge, and I'm sure we all can, that higher education desperately needs to do, a shift in focus is needed from that institution focus to that student focus. So that's how we're going to be talking about the data today, and really setting up these talking points is through a shift in focus. And we're hoping that these present opportunities for us to think about messaging that we could do differently, or hard questions that we need to ask ourselves about our own institutions, or possibly it could be a new service that we don't have yet that could help serve a different type of student population. So through this report, we have 5 key shifts that we want to touch on. The first one is being mindful of money and price. So we're going to get into oops, sorry, that was my watch. What students think about price. The second shift is making learning flexible for students, so digging into modality a bit more. The third one is digging more into DE&I, so not only race and ethnicity, but also thinking a little bit more about neurodivergent students. And then the next one we want to touch on is mental health as a top priority for students in terms of holistic health. And then the last one we want to touch on is how higher education is not a one-size-fits-all. There's different approaches that people need, and how we can start thinking about how we can accommodate to different types of students. Before we dig into each shift, we want to share a data point that we found in our data that really triggered this idea and made us scratch our heads a little bit. And it's 42% of prospects who plan to attend college believe college and universities care most about making money over success of their students. Now, we certainly acknowledge that institutions need to be financially successful in order for their students to have success, but it also goes the other way. Students, in order for students to become successful, that really contributes to the financial success of an institution as well. But I think the key here is how this is worded: care most about making money over success of their students. Knowing what we know about institutions and how much we message and care about students and their success, we started to wonder why students believe this. And we just had a couple questions that came to mind. For example, are institutions being authentic about their commitment to student success? It depends. One point we want to draw to is the fact that some students do not have their transcripts because of a late fee as low as $25. We know that there's legislation right now being passed in some states to prevent that, but that's just one point where someone could really second guess the commitment and the motives behind higher education. The other one, which Jason touched on, is, are people still interested in higher education? In our data, we're finding that there still is value in a degree, but we're still finding that 1 in 4 students are considering not going to college right after school. And then the last one is, are we appealing? And I'd like to add authentic to Gen Z. 88% of the Gen Z population reads reviews before making a purchase. And that is just a normal purchase. That's not considering the fact that higher education is one of their biggest purchases they're going to make in their life. So when we think about and go through these shifts, I think these are important questions to think about. And we hope that you share some of your other questions as well. With that, I'm going to pass it over to Kevin, who is going to walk through our first topic here.
Thank you, Emma. I think we'd be remiss if we did not start with at least a brief conversation about the price of a college degree. Prospective students, Gen Z, has watched their parents pay down their student loan debt and are becoming more and more hesitant to assume debt of their own for a college degree. So we see that 63% of those who are unsure or not planning to attend college say that the price of the degree is the reason, followed by 48% who don't want to take on student loans. This is not new information. This is a very well-documented issue in the higher ed space, though it is certainly worth noting here because it's a continuing and strong theme among this generation. When we ask prospective students what they're paying attention to most when they're researching colleges and universities, we see at the very tippy top price of tuition at 58% and followed by 49% of availability of financial aid and scholarships, which is right behind majors and academic programs. Two things of note that I'd like to point out here. One, we see more of the common messaging points that we see in higher ed around rankings and athletics and school spirit, hovering around the 30% mark in terms of what students are looking for when they're researching colleges and universities. That is not to say that these things are not important, but it may indicate that these items, rankings, school spirit, and athletics, may not need to take up the proportion of the institutional messaging that we often see coming from higher ed. The second point to make here is that more often than not, it's fairly difficult for prospects and their families to find important information about the price of a degree. As Emma and Jason both noted, this is one of the first and likely most substantial investments a student will make in themselves. And so if we know that price and the availability of aid are at the top of the list of things that people are looking for, that information should be really readily available. One of the great examples that we identified around price transparency was this one from St. Norbert College, which is in Wisconsin. They do a really great job of making crystal clear how much students and their families will pay for an education there. At the affordability page that they have on their website, students can find out that tuition for full-time undergrads is $42,304. They can find out that fees are $900, how much their meal plan is. And in terms of housing, they have a secondary page that lists all of their dormitory properties and the costs associated with what kind of living arrangement the student chooses. And they can see that if they want to live by themselves, they're going to have to pay a bit more than if they chose a triple occupancy dormitory living arrangement. So it makes very easy and very clear the amount of money that will be coming out of pocket from the student and their family, which is super helpful and meets the student where they are. Likely no surprise that the increase in tuition means that more students are going to have to work during college. What we found in 2021 was that 56% of students anticipated the need to work through college, and that figure increases by about 10 points to 65% just a year later. Digging a bit deeper into that, we find that seniors are reporting an increase of about 6% year over year, where juniors are reporting an increase of 13%. When we ask these students who are anticipating to work during their college years, how many hours a week they think they'll need to work, we see that 45% of respondents will have to work between 21 and 30 plus hours to make their college experience financially feasible. we see that prospective respondents of Hispanic or Latin descent are more likely to work 30+ hours a week compared to other respondents. And then when we think about what this means for low income, first gen, and students of color, and if you can go to the next slide, there are some more significant and deeper implications where we see the 65% of the college going population anticipating the work. We see a 10% spread between first gen and non-first gen students, and then a significant increase in Black and brown populations having to work compared to their white and Asian counterparts. The other piece to keep in mind here is that for low-income students, we have found in some secondary research analysis that low-income students who have to work more typically have a lower grade point average, and also that the work experiences that Black and brown communities are getting are not always aligned to the degree that they're after. And so the job experience they're getting is more about paying the bills than career preparation, which is an opportunity for institutions to provide more supports where available for working families and students. One of the great examples that I really enjoy that really highlights or illuminates the student-centered model is this from Western Governors University. Western Governors is an online degree offer that is more competency-based than time-based. And so what that means that it measures skills and learning rather than time spent in the classroom. So essentially what the knowledge that you have walking in the door will count toward the degree attainment. Also, it considers the way students learn, how much time they have in their lives, and it makes it a very customizable experience. So for instance, if you are very skilled in math and you might not need to take those classes that are prerequisites, you can skip on to the next level. You can accelerate once you have proven mastery in the subjects that are required for your degree. What this means for students who are looking for more flexibility is that you can build your educational experience in a way that fits into your life as opposed to fitting your life into the educational experience that you're after. This is a very interesting and compelling example that we wanted to lift up here as an idea for meeting students where they are and becoming a more student-centered campus or institution. And then lastly, we wanted to understand where students were looking to attend institutions. We see here that 48% of prospects we surveyed are looking to stay in state, whereas 25% are looking to stay out of state or looking out of state, and another 25% have no preference. In that, 56% of prospective respondents of Latin or Hispanic descent would prefer to stay in state, which is higher compared to other races or ethnicities. And with that, I will turn it back over to Emma.
So I think this section has a lot of similarities between Kevin's section, especially when we think about the need for flexible learning. As Kevin mentioned, 65% of students need to work while they're in college. Some other studies have shown that 1 in 5 students have a child in school. So right now, students have demands outside of their education, which is making attending a 4-year public or private institution really hard for them, thinking about everything else they need to juggle. In our data, we found that 74% of prospects are interested in attending college right after high school. This breaks down in very different ways, as you can see on the right side of the screen. And the respondents could select more than one option. So we're seeing 80% of prospects are interested in attending a 4-year public college or university. 58% are interested in attending a 4-year private. 52% are interested in a community college. 43% are interested in a school located outside of the United States. I'm going to skip over the HBCU and the HSI one. I just want to draw your attention to the online college or university one. 36% are interested in attending an online college or university. So we're going to dig more in the next couple slides around the online piece, but I think the implication here is just the broad amount of competition that exists among traditional 4-year public and private institutions. It is no longer just the institution across state lines or down the street. We are getting competition from online providers. And one thing that we thought was really interesting was the schools located outside of the United States. that could potentially become another source of competition coming from US based students. So as I mentioned, digging more into the online piece, we asked students in particular how they prefer to learn. And on the right-hand side, we found that 49% are still prefer a fully in-person experience, but we're also finding that 39% are interested in some type of online or hybrid learning. I think this really, again, speaks to the flexibility that students are craving. And typically online institutions are in some cases, but not always, more affordable, but they're also more flexible to fit into students' lives. And we're also seeing this come through in some of the most recent enrollment data. So according to the National Student Clearinghouse, online institutions saw a 3.2% increase in undergraduate enrollment in fall 2022 compared to last year. And that is considering that undergraduate enrollment fell overall. So these institutions are seeing more interest in their type of institution. There are differences in the differences between online and hybrid and in-person by gender and also first gen and non-first gen. So at the top is the online and hybrid preferences, and the bottom is fully in person. So we see 51% of men are more interested in an online or hybrid option compared to 56% of women and 59% of non-binary respondents. We're also seeing 45% of first generation students are interested in an online or hybrid option compared to 56% of non-first gen. So again, going back to Kevin's stat that showed 70% of first generation students will need to work during college. They are seeking options that are more flexible, that allow them to juggle different priorities in addition to going to school. Now, on the left-hand side, this is some additional secondary that we have folded in the fuller report. So you'll see more of these mentioned, but this study found that 62% of teens want to forge their own educational path, and that 47% of teens agree that programs they complete in a shorter time frame make more sense. And I think a really good example to highlight this is this education company called Straighter Line. So they are not a typical four-year institution. Rather, they provide a subscription-based education platform. And it's mostly around gen eds. So as you can see, they're offering United States history, intro to sociology for as low as $60, or students can pay $99 a month for unlimited classes. And the average time to finish a class is 33 days. So a lot quicker and a lot cheaper. And some of these, a lot of these courses translate or transfer to other institutions. So for example, I believe some of the institutions that accept these credits are Maryland Global Campus, Purdue Global, SUNY Empire, Tennessee State, and I'm missing one, University of Wisconsin Stout. So it's a mix between these large online platforms, which I don't think is a big surprise. They're trying to make learning accessible to everyone and really enroll as many people as they can. I think this also brings up a point around who is our competition. There's platforms like that. Platforms like these exist in many different ways, and they are competing for the same students that we are. So when we think about how we can, maybe partner with some of these platforms, or is there a way that we can create something like this on our own to help attract the students that are looking for some more flexible learning opportunities? Now, the next section is all around DE&I. One of the stats that really triggered this section was we asked if school, they thought higher education was meant for them. And 44% of respondents believe that higher education was not meant for them. So that's almost half of respondents believed that they cannot fit into the mold of higher education. Now, we had open ends that asked, probed a little bit around that question. And one of the things that kept coming up over and over again were responses from neurodivergent students. So for example, a prospect from the South: I have autism. When I'm viewed as slow, I'm worried I'll be discriminated against while living a college lifestyle. I'm probably still going to go to college so I can get a job, but I'm autistic and learn in a way that modern schools don't like supporting. People like me, an autistic person, would most likely not have the correct accommodations for classes. And the American education system is more catered to children who are able-bodied and able-minded. So I know we all agree that higher education should be accessible and inclusive no matter what. And these quotes really suck to read on our end. But it's clear that they're receiving this message that they believe that college is not meant for them, and they're not meant to fit in the ideal of college because they are different. Now, one of the case studies we wanted to highlight around this topic was Landmark College. They are a college specifically for students who learn differently and meeting neurodivergent students where they are. So they provide education to students who are dyslexic, have ADHD, have autism, or any other executive function challenge. They acknowledge that in order to go to typical colleges and universities, you need high test scores, you need good grades, which in some cases neurodivergent students don't have. And it really limits them from attending or accessing higher education. Now, we wanted to show this for us as a way for us to think about, number one, how we're messaging to neurodivergent students, but also, are we providing experiences for them on campus where they can feel supported within their classes and in the community as well. Going along the lines of community and safety, we had some interesting findings around safety in general. So students of color, women, and non-binary students value safety more than men and white students. So 48% are paying attention to safety of campus and the surrounding area during the college search. This is higher among women at 59% and non-binary students at 60% compared to 31% of men. This is higher among Asian students at 57%, 54% of Hispanic students, and 50% of Black and African-American students compared to 42% of white students. Now, safety has always been something that's really important. In fact, for a while, it was the number one most important attribute for colleges as students were considering their options, but obviously price has overcame that. But this is something that is still important to a lot of students, especially when we think about a more recent report showed that by 2036, 50% of college or high school graduates will be students of color. Yet higher education is still not representative of these underrepresented populations. So when we think about safety, it's not only physical safety of campus and the surrounding area, but also psychological safety and making sure we have communities and support services built for these students. Now, I said we would come back to the HBCU and HSI information. And as we're seeing, underrepresented students prefer institutions with more established communities, going along with the theme of safety and community. So we're seeing 74% of Black and African-American respondents who responded to our survey would consider an HBCU. This is higher among Black women at 81% and Black men at 59%, and Black non-binary students at 40%. 57% of Hispanic respondents would consider an HSI. Now, this is important because since so many institutions still do not reflect underrepresented populations, there really is a less compelling reason to attend those institutions. And this is showing in some of the more recent enrollment numbers that we've seen released recently. I believe it was a 2.5% increase in HBCU enrollment in fall 2022 compared to last year. Now, we're still seeing a decrease in HSI enrollment. I think it was a 1.2% decrease in fall 2022 compared to last year. But I think the implication here, again, is thinking about the experience that we're providing to our more diverse students, and also how we're messaging that to students to making sure it is appealing and also authentic to the institution.
So as Jason mentioned, mental health is a top priority among Gen Z. The reality here is that students are everyone is tired, like Jason said, but students are specifically tired. There are a lot of inputs that are influencing mental health and wellness among this generation. There's pandemics, there's racial unrest, there's costs, there's recessions. There are lots of things that these students have witnessed, and it's starting to affect their mental health and wellness. taking all of the external factors and just on those on mental health and wellness and focusing just on kind of the educational influences, we see that 54% of our respondents say they're flat out burned out on school. Another 50% say they struggled with classwork, and 38% don't feel ready for college. What I think is important to note is that a recent McKinsey report showed that 1 in 4, so 25% of respondents reported feeling more emotionally distressed. And then in a survey of students in 2020 and 2021 academic year, 60% of students surveyed met the criteria for 1 or more mental health diagnoses, which is a nearly 50% increase than what we saw in 2013. What's also important to note here is that when students are investigating opportunities for experiences after high school, some of those choices or options that they have that they might make will be to protect their well-being and mental health. And sometimes higher ed is not the place or the option for them. One of the examples that we wanted to highlight here is the wellness program at Arizona State University. This is a program that's been recognized for its use of wellness technology and adapting to students' needs very, very quickly. They have a 4-prong approach that is live, feel, learn, and engage, which you can see a screenshot of on the right. And it is a holistic approach that includes physical, mental, intellectual, and community wellness. And it's inclusive as well, offering adaptive recreation for students with physical disabilities so they can participate as well. Also, some other features that I found to be really quite interesting about the ASU example is, first of all, it's a lot of the engagements or material is self-directed, so you can do the assessments in the privacy of your dorm room or home before having to engage with a professional if that's necessary. They have things like self-care assessments, relationship trust scales, information about addiction and sexual health, couple satisfaction index, identifying some problematic behaviors that might be present in relationships, a very comprehensive and thorough wellness program that we wanted to highlight here. And then our 5th shift is understanding that higher education is not one size fits all. One of my favorite quotes that I've heard since I've worked in higher ed marketing and branding comes from John Comerford, who is the president of Otterbein University, which is outside of Columbus, Ohio. And at Otterbein, they talk about being a student-ready campus as opposed to expecting college-ready students. And the example that President Comerford often uses is the idea that if they identify a cohort of students who are struggling in, say, math at the college level, they will first get the resources and supports necessary to get the students where they need to be, but they'll also work with the school system that those students came from to understand what they're teaching at the high school level and let the school know what they're expecting at the college level and work to narrow the gap between those two things. And so it's really about making sure that we aren't blaming the student for not being prepared, but making sure that we can work to remove any of the obstacles that might be in the way of their success. 2 quotes that I really love from colleagues at SimpsonScarborough that I'm going to read here. The first from Sophie Stevenson, who is Associate Director of Marketing Strategy, says that appealing to Gen Z has to go beyond rankings. For them, an institution that takes pride in inclusivity over exclusivity is growingly important. They find great value in not just diversity, but also belonging. Institutions can bridge that gap by offering personalized experiences that speak to the unique needs of its students and its prospects. And then following that, Marguerite Moore, Associate Director of Brand Strategy, states that higher ed's hold on tradition can be a deterrent, or a detriment. Today's students are facing different realities, stressors, and traumas than past generations. And schools need to rethink how to serve these students, and it might be abandoning what was once accepted as tried and true. Really insightful thoughts that we want to leave here for your consideration after the fact. Another thing to keep in mind is that education exploration is quite expensive. What we find here is that, first of all, 51% of teens think about their education and their career path daily. And when we ask these prospects what they're looking at, once again, when they're researching colleges and universities, 57% say majors in academic programs, 48% student outcomes data, and then again 28% rankings. Again, that does not make it unimportant, but just the proportion of that conversation might need to lean more into majors and academic programs and student outcomes data. One of the great examples that I find comes from outside of the United States, and that's African Leadership University, who asks their students that instead of declaring a major, they declare a mission. And so in understanding what kind of impact these students want to make on the world, they can craft a curricular experience that matches that and prepares them to make that impact. How this can translate into the American higher education system or experience, this could look like having an opportunity to understand what kind of work or what kind of passions our incoming students have. And maybe there's a customizable approach to their curricular experience that gets them closer to the impact rather than what the institution says is right to learn for these specific job opportunities or career pathways. And then students really value a skills-based education. When we asked what the plans were for the folks who were not planning to attend college right away, we see that 54% are planning to work full-time, 22% are looking to enroll into a trade school or learn a trade, and that's to say nothing of the 35% who are considering a gap year. But we have this really great case study with University of Maine Farmington, who developed an early college pathways program, which allows high schoolers to explore careers, programs, and majors in a remote setting so that they can start to explore what kinds of majors they want to investigate or discover, which is interesting in that one opportunity that we find in higher ed messaging is once a major is declared, there might be some room for more conversation about what kinds of career pathways fall out of that major so that prospective students understand all the different directions that their major can take them. This is a great example of providing access and visibility to the college experience prior to getting there. And so, people might not lose time trying to figure out what they want to do or what kind of job they want coming out of higher ed. And so before we get to question and answer, we want to just leave you with a couple of questions of our own and some ideas that might be worth considering. So I'm not going to read this entire slide in its entirety, but some of the questions are: what do we want our students, what do our students want, need, and value, and how well are we serving against this? How can higher education adapt to give students what they want? And just a few kind of thought starters that we wanted to leave you with is around building content that makes clear the price of a college education. Maybe there's an opportunity to diversify the kinds of success stories that we see. I think oftentimes we visit college campuses and on the alumni wall, there are celebrities and government officials, governors, et cetera, Fortune 500 executives, and those are all very viable and valuable outcome stories, but there are also racks and racks of people who want to be park rangers or teachers or artists, and how we define success at the higher ed level and being intentional about who we are showing and what kinds of stories that we are telling allows more kinds of people with different kinds of goals to see themselves in those stories. Those are our shifts for higher education to become move from institutionally centered to student centered. And I will turn it back over to Steve for question and answer.
Thanks so much, Kevin. And thanks so much, Emma. I know we've done previous research releases here, even this year, and the general theme is often that we don't have enough time for questions and answers and end up having to cut the conversation short. So I'm really excited that we've got a full 20 minutes here available to you all to ask any questions that you might have. Feel free to use the Q&A feature. I know Meredith has been answering several questions as we've gone through this here. But if you have other questions about this data, we'd love to turn the floor over to you and answer those at this time. All right, a couple questions that are coming in here, and some of these I can probably answer a little bit more housekeeping, but further slicing by publics or privates. Not entirely sure if that means public-private high schools, or guessing that's probably what that is. There is a little bit more substance in the report than what we shared in the webinar, although Meredith can back me up. I don't believe we saw meaningful differences in the public versus privates.
Yeah, we can go back to the data and rerun that and make sure that we've sliced everything out by that. And if there is anything of interest, we can share that with you guys.
Excellent. Mara wants to know if we have any info specific to community colleges in the report. And Emma and Kevin, I'll let you speak a little bit to this, but I think one thing that we noted was just increased interest, at least early in the process, for just being open to various types of college as the next step there.
Yeah, that's correct. We saw, I think 36% are interested in attending a community or two-year school. So I think that is something that indicates that there is more interest in attending a two-year school.
The other part I think to add to that is that this intense focus on price really positions community college really well for their 2+2 programs. And so spending 2 years at a community college and then transferring to another large four-year public. These are equations and financial decisions that are more viable now than they used to be. I think community colleges used to be positioned in a much different place, but now when the affordability question is so focused on right now, it really lends itself to repositioning that level of college in this conversation.
The only other thing I would add to that too is I think schools have done a really nice job in solidifying partnerships and articulation agreements with community colleges, and that's happening at various types and levels of institutions. And as that increasingly happens and more transfer students are making their way through the pipeline to traditional 4 years, it's going to inevitably increase the number of students that are thinking about that as a path forward. I think the real rub of what's happened, due to COVID and some other things in the last 2 to 3 years has been the decline in enrollment in community colleges and how long it may take to build that pipeline back up is one of those things that's really challenging. For example, we have a few clients that we've worked with that have seen big increases in first year freshman enrollment, but big declines in transfer enrollment. And obviously the biggest part of that in some states is just the sheer number of students that were going to community college throughout COVID.
And I think that the transfer piece is going to be really interesting for our subsequent studies next year. Also, I think what I find interesting is this, like the counter-cyclical nature of higher ed against the economy, which we typically see people going back to higher ed, into the classroom when the economy is down the way it is. We're not seeing that now. And so what happens then when it comes to making the math work for all the different versions or kinds of educational opportunities that exist?
I want to raise an interesting question that came in from Katie, who wondered about information gathered on parents and parent influence on the college selection process. Meredith, I think you were already in the midst of answering that question. I don't know if you want to answer it publicly.
Wait, am I on? Yeah, I think we have seen that in our studies this year. We've seen an uptick in the parent involvement and students saying that they are leaning into their parents as a resource. We also saw the kind of decrease in leaning into the college the admissions counselors, guidance counselors as that resource. And I think, obviously over the past couple of years with COVID and availability and just other stressors, that's not surprising. But yeah, we've definitely seen that uptick, and it's interesting that you've seen it as well.
So yeah, just scrolling through here. Interesting question from Catherine, who wonders, do we have a sense of how much the intensified focus on price is the result of a change in demographics, like more low-income first-gen students enrolling, versus how much is the result of the economy generally? I'll open up the floor on our side if anyone wants to take a first stab at giving their perspective on that.
I can respond first, and I'll let others weigh in. I think, I mean, we've seen, Emma made this point earlier, we've seen in the past, I would say 8 years or so, cost overtake safety as being the top concern. And I think it's less about the economy and the makeup of, or the changing demos of student population, and more the reality of the fact that tuition has greatly outpaced, any other levels of inflation or other economic things. And I know that for those of us that work in this industry, we understand the reasons why that's happened, and declines in state funding and increases in merit aid and all kinds of other things. But the reality is that students are paying much, much more than generations prior to them did, and the coverage of the amount of debt that is accumulating both at a global and nationwide scale, as well as for individual families, is not something that any singular institution is going to be able to overtake in their messaging. And so as much as you want to focus your messaging around why you're so valuable that you need to charge what you're charging, the reality is that people don't want to hear it. What they want to know is like a clear understanding of what it is that you're charging and what the measurable outcomes are that make it worth charging that amount, so that they can figure out and make that calculation on their own. And that's where sort of meeting these students in earnest and honest ways is going to be more and more important in terms of what you're communicating and that pathway that you're building to that information through your marketing channels.
The other point I want to share, I think just to build on or piggyback on what Jason just shared, is that the rate of college, the cost of college, the price of college has increased at a rate far greater and far faster than family incomes, right? So I think CNBC reported, I think back in 2019, that tuition has increased at 169% since 1980, and the incomes are not following that. And so that piece around working in college, these students who are now having to work, previous generations were able to cover their entire cost of college with the job that they had in college, and nowadays that's no longer viable. And those work experiences are more for paying the bills and not really for paying for college. There's not enough money to go around, essentially. And so I think that's a part of it as well. The messaging is a part of it, but also like the money is just not keeping up with the cost of the price of tuition.
I want to turn to a really interesting question that related to some of the examples that you all were showing about meeting the students where they are and understanding the issues they may have in their enrollment and retention. And that's a question from Vanetta, who wonders if we have any examples of institutions that are addressing the childcare issue well. I love this question.
I think it's a super important question, and I hate to keep picking on Otterbein University and outside of Columbus, but they have a great program there where they use their early childhood development students to provide childcare for night classes for students, adult learners who are going to night classes. And it seems like an easy and logical solution, and I'm not sure how easy and logical it is for many institutions, but Otterbein seems to have figured out an option where students drop off, adult students or students with children drop off their child for childcare, and then they go to their class. It's free of charge to the student who is attending the class, and the early childhood development students get the experience with the child and caring for a child while the student gets to learn in the classroom, which I think is a really logical and smart way of offering some support to students who need it, who are after an education.
I will say too, I think one thing, for the marketing communications professionals on the webinar to consider, some of these things if your institution is not operationally or programmatically in a position to launch new types of programs like the child care program that Kevin mentioned at Otterbein, that doesn't mean that you can't pay attention to these concerns that those types of students have. And so ways that you are supporting or highlighting stories of those kinds of individual students and the way they may be managing what we know is a pressure, right, can be an important part of your content plan and the way that you're bringing those stories forward. So even if you don't have a program like Otterbein's, but you have a host of students that are living that experience, making sure that you're highlighting that in your marketing channels can go a really long way and may help overcome some of those barriers that those types of students have, because they're getting an example of ways that other people have done that.
It was an interesting question. I'm sorry, I'm sorting through the chat here. I think it was from Gary, who wondered if there was any discussion on the loss of sense of community engagement with students. Because I think it's worth noting that even though we've emerged from the height of the pandemic, we're still engaging with students who have spent a considerable amount of their high school working online. And the question here is if they want more face-to-face options moving forward. I will share personally that I expected in some way to see that kind of shift based on how much education in their high school has been online. Emma and Kevin, I'll look to you because I don't think we actually really saw that. Instead, I feel like we actually saw that online is kind of here to stay and that there's an increased interest in online, even for a quote unquote traditional audience for which that's pretty new.
I think right now it's kind of a difficult question to ask. I think it depends on what the student is after. I think who they are and where they're coming from and what their expectations are for themselves around safety, maybe accessibility, et cetera, will play into some of that. But I don't know much more than that. I'm not sure if Emma, do you have any thoughts from the sections that you presented today?
I'm sorry, I wasn't listening to Steve's question.
No.
I'm good. Continue on.
Around the online option for prospective students.
I mean, I feel like I've seen in my work and some of the research that I've done, there has been more of an interest around the online option. I think it kind of reflects to what we saw in terms of more flexibility and more options that it provides students. I think it also goes to Kevin's last point that he presented is that major hopping is really expensive and that a lot of students can't do that. And online schools really give people the opportunity to explore different academic areas before they really commit to something. So knowing that Gen Z really wants control over their educational experience and also wants that personalized experience that they're being used to in other areas of their life, I think online education is really going to provide that source for them to personalize and explore different areas that they find interesting.
I'm going to look through and see if we've got time. I think we've got maybe time for one more. I think this is an interesting question here. And Emma, I don't know if it's in this study or you've done so much incredible secondary research for us. I sometimes lose my sense of place in terms of where data is coming from, but an interesting observation / question from Lauren, who wonders for students who are working and need more flexible schedules, are they seeing students working on campus or working other jobs because those jobs pay more? And I can't remember where it's from, but I know you've talked a little bit about the jobs that students are having and then the ramifications in terms of things like career services and other campus offerings that impacts.
Yeah, so this is in the Fuller report. So you'll see this in the downloaded version, but I believe a professor from Rutgers did a study around this, and he found that a lot of students, like first generation students, tend to take more service types of jobs on campus. So they'll work in the dining halls or they'll work maybe in the campus gym. And it doesn't necessarily provide the skills that really equate to the academic area that they're looking to go into. So if they're biology, there's not a lot of transferable skills between those two areas. And this professor found that this has a detrimental effect to these students in terms of GPA and outcomes moving forward. Reversely, a lot of more wealthier white students tend to take jobs that directly align with their interest. So they're also making money, but they are getting the skills necessary and the networks in place that when they graduate, they'll have something to fall back on and to be ready when they graduate. So I think it kind of goes back to Kevin's case study of WGU. When we think about if students are taking jobs, whether it's on campus or off campus, can we reward them somehow with credits or make it a little bit more cheaper? Or are there other opportunities we can open up to first generation students or students that don't have strong networks and give them opportunities to work that isn't necessarily a service job?
Excellent. And with that, I think that's a really good spot to wrap us up today. I want to really thank everyone from SimpsonScarborough who contributed to this report, not all of which are the faces that you see here today. This was a real team effort, but big time thanks to Emma and Kevin for all of their really hard work on this report, as well as Jason and Meredith here as well. And Carrie, who's also been in the background here doing so much of the work to make this event happen and get this report out into the public. Thank you to the 200 plus of you who made time out of your day to join us. I know that your calendars, whether you are in person in the office or whether you're still working from home, are jam-packed. So the fact that you've dedicated an hour out of your day to join us here today is not lost. We have so much gratitude to all of you who have spent your time with us today. As I mentioned one more time, we did record this. You'll get a recording of this webinar today. You'll also get a copy of the report delivered straight to your inbox later today. And with that, one more time, I'll just say thank you for being with us. I hope you have a great rest of your day. Keep on keeping on.